Hello YouTube. I'm going to be making a short series of videos about how I use Linux. Over the past couple of years, I've had a number of people that have been interested in using Linux ask me about my setup. Usually this is motivated by the direction that Windows is traveling down, especially with Windows 11 being pretty terrible. Typically I'll end up spending a couple of hours showing them around my system and they'll be asking me some questions. Well, generally I don't mind spending the time. I feel like I'm overloading then with a lot of information, this can be more of a hindrance than a help. Therefore, it's better if I was to document this in a series of videos, which is why I'm doing this. I'm primarily going to be demonstrating how I set everything up in Debian. If you was to ask me which distro to use, I'm going to recommend Debian because that's what I use. I don't use any other Linux distros typically anymore, and I probably won't be the best person to ask about them. So what we're going to do first, we're going to do a fresh installation of Debian 12. Um, Debian 12 is the current release of the operating system, so that's what we should be using. I'm not going to do an exhaustive explanation of the installation process. It's better documented elsewhere on YouTube. I don't think it'll be adding any value if I do that. This is simply to show people where we're starting from. So what we're going to be doing is going to be doing the simplest installation of Debian 12 to get the virtual machine set up. I've already downloaded an ISO. So what we're going to do first is literally in our virtual machine manager, which is the Linux KVM, essentially, we're just going to click plus, and we're going to go into the window here. And what it says choose how you would like to install the operating system. So local install media, ISO, image, and CD-ROM, which is exactly what we want because I've already downloaded it. So you go browse, and you come up to this other window, and you have to go browse local. It's a little bit confusing. But that's the way to do it. And my window's sticking to the top there. And it says Debian Live. This is my Debian Live ISO. This is just a GNOME ISO. So you can find this by googling Debian Live ISO, and that's it. So we select that. What it will do, it will say choose operating system you're installing. We're just going to untick automatic detect because it never seems to work. I'm not sure why. And we select Debian 12 because that's what we're using. We go forward. Typically, I like to put 4 gigs in. I don't think 2 is really enough. 2 gigs is enough RAM. And we're going to give it 4 CPUs. So we're just allocating the resources here. I think this is reasonable amount, and we should have like a reasonably snappy system. We can always increase it later on. This is in the virtual machine settings. This is not set in stone, and we can then go forward. And it says create. I think we create the virtual disk image here. So I usually like to give it 25 gig. Ooh, there we go, 25 gigs. And we're going to call this Jankware Demo VM, as that's what it is. And we're going to do finish. This is going to set up a virtual machine, and now we've got our virtual machine here running. I'm not going to use the live system. You can do an installation from the live system, and there's something called a Calamares installer. I don't like it. I actually prefer the regular installer. I'm probably in the minority of people with that preference, but that's what it is. I'm showing you how I do it, not how other people do it. This is how I do it. So we do start installer, and after a couple seconds, we come up with a select language. So if we go, we're going to be selecting English, and then your location. Obviously, I'm in the United Kingdom. You can tell by my accent, and it says British English, the only correct one. So this is your keyboard layout. Mine happens to be British English. Choose whichever one's appropriate for you, and we go continue. And it will just go through doing the basic bits and pieces before installation once you've got this keyboard set up. This takes maybe like a minute or two typically. And yeah, we're configuring the network. So we're just gonna, it's asking us to configure the host name, which is really just a computer name. So we're just going to call it Jankware Demo VM. And we're going to go continue. And configure the network, it's LAN. And this is the most confusing part, the installation process, in my opinion, because, well, we'll just read what it says. You need to set a password for root. The thing is, I don't want a root account enabled in the system. So if you just go down a little bit, it says the root user should not have an empty password. If you leave this empty, the root account will be disabled and the system's initial user account will be given the power to become root using the sudo command. I prefer this, so I'm just going to leave these blank. And what it will do now, we're going to be setting up our basic user account, and it wants you to put in your name so it can suggest a username. So we're going to say it. We're just going to use Jankware, and it will suggest us Jankware, and it's going to ask us to set a password. And then we go continue. Now it's going to be detecting our disks and set up that partition out. I'm not going to do any fancy partitioning. This is simply to get it set up as quickly as possible. So what we're going to do is click guided use entire disk. And we're going to select the disk. There's only one in there. That's our virtual disk that we set up when we initially set up the VM. And we're just going to do all files in one partition. It doesn't matter for this. So we're just going to say continue. And this is the disk partitioner. It's not the best one. It can be a little bit confusing if you're not used to it. It can be still confusing if you are used to it. It's not the best. However, if you see on here, it says virtual disk VDA, 26.8 gigabytes, Virtuo block device. And we've got a primary partition of 25.8 gigabytes. That sounds about right. An ext4 file system, and that's our root file system. If you're coming from Windows, that's literally, it's basically the equivalent of a C drive. And it sets up a swap partition. I'm not going to go into what the swap partition does at the moment. It's essentially the virtual memory, where the virtual memory lives. So we go finish partitioning and write changes to disk. And all we're going to be doing here is confirming it. And now it installs the system. So I'm going to come back to you after this finishes. Debian is now installed, and it wants us to set up a network mirror. So we just click yes. United Kingdom, because that's where we are. And dev.debian.org. You can select other mirrors. This is simply to get as set up the system as quickly as possible. So we're just going to choose dev.debian.org. We're not using HTTP proxy, so leave it blank. And then it configures apt. And this is just some final post setup stuff that it needs to do. Now it's installing Grub. This is the bootloader. We need to install this for the system to boot. So it's asking us, do we want to install Grub to the primary drive? We only have one drive, and we only have the one operating system on here. So yes, we want to do that. When then we choose Dev VDA and go continue. Then it will install Grub, and it will do some post installation cleanup, which should only take like a couple minutes at most. So now it's asking us to reboot. Installation's complete, so that's what we're going to do. Just going to press continue, and the virtual machine will reboot now. And if we just wait, it should just boot up Debian. There we go. It's booting up nicely now. Doesn't take long. And we are ready to log in. And that's where our video ends. In the next video, we'll be covering some basic desktop setup with GNOME. I prefer using GNOME. Other people don't. Use what you like, but I'm going to be covering GNOME. So that's what we're going to be covering in the next video. And see you then.